Hi, folks. It's time for another edition of Humor in Politics. For today, I'd like to talk about immigration, refugees, and illegal immigration. Now, a lot of folks out there will tell you that if we don't accept refugees, that goes against what America stands for. And that's just not the case. Our founding fathers, in their wisdom, realized that we needed to have immigration in order to make this country great. And that's true. And they did that because we needed to fill up the spaces, the great American spaces that this country holds. We needed settlers. And so they had an immigration policy. Now, some of that policy also dictates that we don't want to bring in people that are undesirable for whatever reason. Maybe their politics are revolutionary in ways that we don't like. Maybe they don't have something to offer in terms of a skill or education or what have you. And in any event, they did that for a reason, because they wanted to contribute to the quality of the populace of this great nation. Excuse me while I enjoy my cigar. So, let's talk about immigration for a moment. Right now, and for the last 15 years, possibly 20 years, we have seen about 1 million people immigrate to the United States every year legally. That's legally, okay? Now, this policy, which is set by our government, is not based on the types of things that you might think it is. It is pretty much set up so that this country will be overpopulated within the next 30 years if we continue at the same rate of about 1 million a year. Add to that the illegal immigration, which is largely from South America and the countries there, Mexico, Guatemala, all those other countries. And we've seen 11 million people enter the U.S. illegally in the last 20 years. So in addition to the 20 million that came here legally, we have another 11 million that came here illegally. Now, you could say that the folks that have come here illegally are economic refugees, and you would probably be right. Most of them want to have the same type of opportunity that we have here in America. They're fleeing poor economic conditions in Mexico and South America. They're fleeing drug cartels, political purges, and what have you. And that's all well and good, okay? Who wants to stick around when you're not getting paid, you can't feed yourself, and somebody's going to kill you? Just doesn't make sense. But it adds to our social burden. Well, these cigars have a lot of extra stuff in the end of them. Anyhow, it adds to our social burden, both in welfare programs, healthcare services, you name it, it adds to it. And certainly these people contribute back to the United States in terms of the work they perform, the good they do, and the contributions to our overall economy that they do make. That's fair. Unfortunately, it also, as I said, adds to our social burden. Some people will argue that it adds to the statistical unemployment that we have. And I would say that's partially right, but that is not statistically proven to be a huge factor. There's lots of jobs that immigrants take that Americans just don't want. This is particularly true in the agricultural sector, where there's lots of menial jobs such as picking apples, processing apples, or other farm-related goods. And lots of Americans, for whatever reason, call it laziness, call it a sense of entitlement, they just don't want to do these jobs, which is sad. Sad commentary on America today. But we still need somebody to pick the crops. We still need somebody to process the crops. We still need somebody to be housekeepers, nannies, dog walkers, and what have you. So there's a bit of a controversy over that. But the fact is that right now in America, I live in upstate New York. This is a microcosm of poverty. People here do not have enough to eat. They do not have jobs. They haven't got a place to live in some cases. The lack of economic opportunity is crushing upstate New York. Now, this is in part due to the urban versus rural struggle that we've seen take place over the last 20 or 30 years. This is promulgated largely by people in Albany and New York City that want to see the migration of people from rural areas to the city. Now, they want this because it adds to the Democratic base. Okay, got that? It adds to the Democratic base. Because once those folks move to the city, whether they're employed or they're on social programs of some sort, they tend to forget their rural roots, their rural traditions, and they become Democrats, liberals. There's nothing wrong with being a Democrat or a liberal per se, as long as you don't infringe upon the rights of your other fellow Americans. But anyhow, that's what they want to see. They want people to move to the big urban areas. They want to have those votes, and they want to have control over a larger segment of the population. And that's what they get when people move to the cities. Now, in my lifetime, a lot of people have had to move from rural areas to the big cities in order to get jobs. Just a fact. You know, we've lost industry in rural America. Upstate New York used to be a haven for industry. And that's no longer the case. A lot of the policies that has been set forth by various Democratic governments combined with the overall trend of globalization and the loss of jobs to automation and also to foreign markets have contributed a significant amount to that factor. So, when we have all of these Americans still here, living in rural and urban environments, that are living in poverty, that don't get enough to eat. This is children I'm talking about, and adults that don't get enough to eat, that are homeless in some cases, veterans that are homeless. I would say that immigration should be halted. I would call for a one-year moratorium on all immigration, with a few exceptions for immediate family members, political dissidents in some cases, and a few other extreme exemptions. But overall, a one-year moratorium on immigration. So that would cut 1 million people a year coming to the U.S. Dang, it didn't stay lit. That's better. Dang. Tobacco's a bad habit, but it is a good cigar. So that moves us to illegal immigration. I talked a little bit about that. These are economic refugees. Okay? Americans are not heartless. I'm not heartless. We've got a porous southern border. You don't see too many Canadian illegals coming over. Nope. But a lot from the south. Now, Donald Trump, he says that we should build a wall. I just don't like Donald's idea. When the Berlin Wall fell, which was built by commies, When that fell, it was celebrated around the world. Okay? Americans don't build walls. Americans build human capital. So I'm not enamored of Donald's wall concept. I don't think it would work too well. It might, but that's a lot of wall you got to build. It's a long border. So here's my suggestion. I think that we should seek to make all that 11 million illegal immigrants from Mexico and other South American countries, we should make them legal Americans, American citizens. Yes, that's what we should do with them. But, and I've got a lot of Mexican friends, and they all tell me that they came here for the opportunity. A lot of them send money back to Mexico to their family that's stuck there, that for whatever reason can't physically make the journey, or they have elderly parents to take care of. They say, when I've asked them the question, how would you feel if America were to offer Mexico the opportunity to become part of the United States? And I got a reaction that I didn't expect. You know, I thought that they would have this huge national fervor to maintain sovereignty for Mexico. And that just wasn't the case. Their main concern, and you may find this ironic, their main concern was to maintain their cultural identity. Let that sink in for a minute. To maintain their cultural identity. Well, none of us can truly say that we have any specific cultural identity here in the United States. It's a homogenized country of immigrants. And yet, with this wave of immigration that we've seen from the South, it has definitely changed our cultural identity. And that's not a bad thing. I mean, I love mole verde and other hot Mexican dishes. I'll eat them all day long. Makes me sweat, but I'll eat them. I love that kind of food. And they've got some great traditions. And I would say, and I have said to my Mexican friends, that I don't believe that maintaining their cultural identity would be a problem. So, if that is the case, and we were to say, as a nation, our government would have to put forth the diplomatic approach and say, how would you like to be part of America? And, of course, we would have to look at border control as one portion of that. We could say, look, you've had 11 million people that have illegally crossed your border and come to the United States to live because your government just sucks. And there's lots of violence there and so forth. And, if you want to become part of the United States, we're happy to accommodate you. Diplomatically, no bloodshed. Ours isn't perfect in terms of government. God knows in this election season, we all understand that it's not perfect. But if we at least made the diplomatic approach and said, look, since you can't control your border and your people want this opportunity, why not extend that opportunity to all of your people and become part of the United States? It'd be a win-win, with the exception of the people that are currently in power in Mexico, in the government and in the cartels, which is increasingly indistinguishable between the two. So, dang, that would be the diplomatic approach. And you never know what they'll say. It's likely that the politicians in Mexico would say no, and that they'd try to raise a nationalist fervor in order to prevent it. And in that case, you would have to say, well, look, that's fine with us, but we don't want any more people crossing the border illegally, and it's up to you to make sure that that doesn't happen. Because if it does happen, we will control your borders for you with extreme prejudice. And I think that perhaps, while not seen as a humanitarian thing by any means by certain people on the left, that might be a working objective. I think that might put some seed in the back of someone's mind that says, maybe we shouldn't cross the border today because there's a machine gun nest there and we might get shot. So that would definitely, I think, give people pause before they swim the Rio Grande. Yeah, it's almost out. So, seems a bit harsh, doesn't it? Terrible, terrible thing. What a right-wing nut job I am. Not so much. You look back to the 19th century, and we had lots of disagreements with Mexico when it was under colonial governmental jurisdiction by Spain or France or what have you. And we ended up turning large swaths of Mexico into states. And I don't think there's anyone that can argue how well that turned out. Okay? Yeah, there was bloodshed and stuff involved. It wasn't fair to everyone concerned, but it's fair now. And it's worked out pretty well. Those states that were formerly part of Mexico are producing pretty well. Great places to live, with a few exceptions along the border where we're having some issues. Now, this would also be an excellent way to control and eliminate the cartels. So, it's a concept our politicians will never broach. They don't ever talk about it. I never hear anyone speak of it. As far as I know, and the people I've asked, I'm the only person that has ever mentioned it. And I get my ideas on this type of thing from history. It's out there. It's written. You can read it. They may not teach it in school anymore if it's not politically correct, but it's out there. So I would say that we can make that diplomatic offer. And then if it fails after that, perhaps we can take stronger measures in order to make it happen. I think that if we were able to have a referendum in Mexico on how much of the populace would like the opportunity of America, then we might see some democratic results that would be supportive of this idea without bloodshed. But I think that if there is a huge pushback, but we still have problems, and we're accepting waves of economic refugees, it is a threat to national security. Not in the military sense, but in the economic and structural sense of what it is to be a nation. If we cannot protect our borders, then we are not worthy of being a nation. So I think it's something that we must do. Now, if you look further south to the other countries that are having issues in a similar vein to Mexico, and we're seeing mass illegal immigration from those areas, back in the 20th century, we had a project called the Panama Canal. It was a wonderful idea. The French had tackled it at one point in time. And of course, they failed because of it was a massive engineering project. I won't get into the history of that. Suffice it to say that we built the Panama Canal, great American achievement. And Teddy Roosevelt had to do some political maneuvering there with the Colombians because they didn't want the Panamanians to sell us the land because they thought, there was a lot of coups and revolutions and so forth. But Teddy Roosevelt, with his big stick policy, managed to push it through, and it worked out great. Not only for America, mind you, but for the rest of the world. And it still works today. Trouble is, we gave it away, gave it back to the Panamanians, free of charge. Here you go. Didn't matter all the lives and capital it took to build it. We just gave it away, gave it back to them. But there it is, the Panama Canal. Cuts right across the isthmus there. It's a lot shorter border. So if you think about it, and our model with Mexico and having them join the United States as part of us could be brought farther south to the Panama Canal, we would have a short, easily defensible border, and we could bring peace and harmony to the entire South American region up to that point. So that is, I think, the better way to tackle illegal immigration. It offers an equal opportunity for everyone south of the border to that point to become Americans. And there's lots of good natural resources there. Yes, some of that land is just junk, but hey, there's great beach resorts. The food is great. Could work out just fine. So that's where I stand on that. Now let's move on to refugees. Right now, the hullabaloo and the national media is all about Syrian refugees. Now, some people that I know, and you know who you are, would say that we have a moral obligation to take on all these refugees, or at least a portion of them. And I would say that we have a moral obligation to tackle poverty, hunger, homelessness here in America first. You know, if you are on the left and you want to extend citizenship to everyone who is ever in need, especially refugees, and yet you are unwilling to tackle poverty, hunger, and homelessness here in America, I would say that is a dilemma. I mean, you know, a moral obligation, okay, to serve the people here first. If you cannot conquer poverty, hunger, and homelessness for the people who are already citizens, why would you want to add to our social burden by bringing in more? It makes no sense whatever. And yet the same people cry and say, oh my God, we've got a moral obligation to help these people. And to that I would say, yes, we've tried many times to help these people. Now, Syria, you can debate whether we tried to help them or not. You know, I had somebody comment to me that, hey, we caused that problem. And so we've got the moral obligation to help those people. Well, I don't recall that we caused the Syrian problem. It seems like it's a civil war between a dictator and people that want to be free. And we didn't help those people, even when they crossed the red line that the president set forth, when they used chemical weapons. We didn't help them. And yet, this person thinks that we have a moral obligation to help them now because we caused the problem. Now, it's true that we might have caused a problem in Iraq. I mean, you can't deny that it's a mess. And ISIS is rampant there with their caliphate. Hey, we pulled all the troops out. We didn't argue with the Iraqi government to keep them there for their own good. And so that left a mess. We probably shouldn't have gone into Iraq in the first place and deposed the Saddamator. We probably should have left him in power so that he could have killed his own people, and the people on the left could have complained and cried about that some more. But hey, we made a mistake. We went there, we kicked butt, and then because of some liberal-leaning policies where we couldn't reach agreement with the puppet government we left in place and pulled our troops out, somehow we're at fault. Okay, so we're at fault. How about our allies in the region? Saudi Arabia. They have a huge tent city, all set up to accept refugees. It's got air conditioning. Air conditioning in tents in Saudi Arabia. I don't really understand how that actually works, but I've seen pictures of it. It's there. They don't have a single refugee. 3 million of them could go there. I would say we should lean on Saudi Arabia and say, hey, you're a Muslim country. Here's a bunch of Muslims. They want to go somewhere. Why don't you take them? But that would be heartless. That would be cruel. Maybe they're not the same kind of Muslims. Maybe they kill each other. I don't know. But what I'm saying is we can't morally bring more people here when we can't deal with the people we have fairly. I don't know about you, but I've done my part through service organizations to help feed the poor, the homeless, here in my own region. And it's very hard to look at a homeless vet or a homeless child or someone in hunger and tell them, yeah, I think it would be fair to bring in more mouths to feed just to solve some moral dilemma that someone on the left has. I don't think I can look them in the eye and tell them that. So I guess I'd have to say that I'm against bringing refugees from Syria into the United States based on some moral obligation that the left thinks we have for that, when the left will not even recognize the moral obligation we have to feed and house the people here in the United States. It's hypocrisy. It really is. So, again, to review, 1 year moratorium on all immigration, cuts 1 million people. Solve the border problem, eliminates illegal immigration altogether. That's another 11 million. Syrian refugees, refugees of any stripe. Nope. Solves the problem. And then the resources that we would commit to those additional people could be utilized to help feed and shelter people here, which to me makes more sense. So I guess I'm about at the end of this rant. I'll continue a bit more with foreign policy and war in another segment. But I wanted to share this with you today to help make you understand, if I can, some of the dissimilar opinions on this, and try to sort out what our moral obligations actually are. For those of you that say we can multitask because we're the greatest country in the world and we can solve both problems at once, I'd say it doesn't look like it's working out that well. And we've had a Democratic president for 8 years almost. So if I'm still seeing a massive amount of poverty and hunger right where I live, I don't think that multitasking is working out too well, do you? And if you do, I'd like to know how you would approach it with even more mouths to feed. Tell me, because I'd like to know. And if you can fit all of that in a 10-pound bag, my friend, then you're a miracle worker. Thanks, folks.